All right. Thanks for being here. Dan
Hey,
Ramm,
thank you.
writer, builder, producer.
Builder,
What
I don't know
is,
about that anymore, but
yeah, I think you're in construction. I mean, if you know what a header is, then I think you're okay.
once upon a
What's the
time, yeah.
process? What's the process for getting a TV show made?
Boy, if I knew that, I could make $1 million. I think it's like any other business. You fill a need. I mean, like we're just talking about construction. You find people need a gazebo, and if you can build a good gazebo, then you got a good chance of getting some work. So, I mean, I think it's the same with television. Every network out there has a problem, and the problem is they have 24 hours, 7 days a week of space to fill with content, and content that keeps people engaged and interested, and long enough to stay for the commercial breaks for linear networks. So I think it's just about finding that need and filling it. Sometimes it's luck, sometimes it's studying what's going on and finding out what's being bought these days, what the mandates are from the network. There's a lot of different cogs to that wheel, but it all boils down to filling a need.
So then when you started writing, I guess construction came before writing,
Yeah, so I
like
grew up in
professionally.
Kansas City, Missouri. Diehard Chiefs fan. And I did construction on summers when I was out of school. And then when I got to be about 19, I knew a guy in Los Angeles who had a construction company. He said, "Hey, if you want to come out here, I'll hire you. I just got this big job." So I thought, all right. I mean, that sounded dreamy, LA, man. And this is like in the mid 80s. So I moved to California. And when I got here, the guy said, "Oh yeah, that big job I had, it fell through, so I can't hire you now." So I was like, "Well, do I go back or do I try to stick it out here and find something?" So I ended up becoming a chimney sweep of all things for about 3 or 4 years. Excuse me. And then I got back into construction and then ultimately roofing, and I did that for 10 years, maybe more, until I met the actor Joe Mantegna to do some work on his house. And we just kind of hit it off. We became friends, and within about 2 years of our first meeting, he had gotten a series on CBS, and he said, I'm thinking about starting a production company. Maybe you want to come work for me." And I was like, "Well, yeah, let me do that." Um, so that's kind of how that transition happened. Now, prior to me working for him, I had written things just for my own sort of pleasure, self-satisfaction. I'd read a book, autobiography by Sammy Davis Jr., was a fantastic entertainer and had an incredible story that so far, as I could tell, nobody had really told. So I thought, geez, this should be a screenplay. This should be a movie. And then I thought, well, nobody's done it. Maybe I could do it. So I bought a book on screenwriting, and I got some software, and I went at it. And I wrote this screenplay that I had friends read. Everybody seemed to like it. And after about 2 years of working for Joe, I showed it to him. Um, and I think he was probably hesitant at first, like, "Okay, you were in construction 2 years ago. Now you're a screenwriter. Like, I don't get it, right?" But he really liked it. He said, "You know what? This is good. It needs work, but you have a talent and is writing something that you want to do." And I had never thought about that question. Nobody had ever asked me that question, and I thought, yeah, I mean, I do. I do enjoy that process. So that was kind of the beginning of our professional relationship on that level. He sort of mentored me in everything I wrote. He would read it and critique it and tell me what was wrong with it, what was right with it. And every show he got on, I paid a lot of attention. I studied what was going on. I read the scripts, tried to understand why they were written the way they were. So it was kind of a self-education for me. And that was 24 years ago. So far so good.
Nice. So what is your process for writing then? Whether it's a book or screenplay or whatever?
I think for both, having a good story. I mean, people complain about television a lot because there's a lot of junk on TV. But I think the number one thing that people like about a show is the characters, right? So if you think of your whatever your favorite show is, let's say Criminal Minds, for example, we all know that it's a grim subject matter, but what we really kind of remember or think about, and I've been with Joe when fans say, my favorite episode was, and it's never a particular case they solved or a particular crime. It's always the time that Rossi cooked everybody pasta, or the time that Penelope finally went on a date with so and so. Those kinds of things is what people relate to and gravitate towards. And so I always try to develop interesting characters that have depth to them, characters that are a lot of times based on people that I know or I have met. Because I mean, let's face it, they always say write what you know, and that's very true. So all my characters, most of my characters in the books and in screenplays are either loosely based on people I know or combinations of people that I know. So that's number one, having some strong characters. Then of course you want to have whatever situation they have to deal with, whether it's saving the world or getting a divorce or whatever the story is. But I tend not to start anything unless I know what my ending is going to be, because when I was first working with Joe, I read a lot of scripts that were submitted to him. I still do. And so many scripts start out great, like, oh my God, this is pulls you right in. And then the second act is like, oh, okay, this is good. Third act, it starts to kind of falter. And the end is kind of like, why did you end it like that? And I think a lot of times people start writing without the ending in mind. And so they have this great concept and this great beginning, and they start writing and they're very excited, but then they don't know where they're going. And so because they don't know where they're going, they start to flounder, and you can see that in the writing. You can tell, oh, he doesn't know or she doesn't know what to do next. So they're just filling time or filling space. So I think knowing your ending is very important.
Do you visualize those then if you're doing a screenplay before you ever write it? Before you ever take notes while it's just like bubbling around in your mind? Are you thinking this would be a cool ending? Maybe you got music that goes with it, or
Yeah,
like
I
the
do.
unofficial soundtrack?
Yes, I do. Certain things inspire me. Like I'll see a story on the news about something that happened, and I think, man, that'd be a great ending for something. And then I sort of backtrack from there, and how do I get to there? And it's funny. I was just having an email conversation earlier today with my book editor. Her name is Kara Highsmith, and she's really a wonderful editor and a wonderful writer in her own right. And she said, I want you to look at these two books I'm working on. And so she sent me the first 6 or 8 pages of these two completely different books that she's working on. I read them, and they're both great, and draws you in. And I wrote her back and I said, how in the world do you write two books at once? It takes all my focus to write one. And she said something that's very interesting, and that she said, well, the muse, the stream of consciousness, or whatever you want to call it, that speaks to her. She said, sometimes it's talking about this book, and other times it's talking about that book. I don't shut it off. I just go with the flow, right? And what was cool for me is, like, I have that same thing, and I didn't know other people had that. When I start to write something, the words just sort of pop. The imagery sort of pops, and so I haven't ever really, so far, knock on wood, struggled with like writer's block or anything like that. Once I sort of get in that mode and start writing, and if I do start to stumble, I just go back 10 pages and reread what I've written, and then that usually helps me into the next piece. So it's an odd thing. I don't know how to explain it. And I would think that people in other, I guess it's just knowing your job really well. If you're a fireman and you see some fire burning in a certain way, what's going to happen next. Or guys in the military when they're out in country and they see something happen, like they know what to do next because they've been trained for it, you know. So it's just, I guess it's just that.
I think it's those steps of writing that anybody can do it, but everybody doesn't do it because there's multiple steps to getting a finished product. So you have the thought occurs wherever thoughts come from and however they occur. And then you have to capture it somehow. You have to write it down. And if you don't write it down, you're not a writer. You're just a person that had an idea that it's gone now.
Well, I think people second guess themselves too much. I think you're right. I think most people, not if not everybody, could write a good story. If you can tell a good story, you can write a good story, right? But we second guess. And the worst thing writers do, and I've done it, I'm guilty of it, is you start writing and you write a paragraph and you think, oh, wait, that's not very good. I should go back and change it, or I should do that. No, you know, my wife gave me this little thing. It's around here somewhere. Here. It says, you know, write without fear, edit without mercy. And that's kind of my mantra, you know, like I'll just write and write and write and not think about what I've written, or should I go back and fix that or change that, or why did I name that character that name? You know, none of that stuff matters. You just write out your story like you were going to write a letter to somebody, tell them a story. You later when you go back, because like when I wrote my first book, Long Branch, I probably went over that book 10 times after it was completed. After the first time I completed it, I probably reread it 10 times, tweaking, changing, taking stuff out, putting stuff in. You know, that's that process. Then my editor did the same thing. She goes through it and says, well, what do you think about this instead of that? And da, da, da. So it's a process, you know, just like anything else. When you're building a house, in the very beginning, you're working on the foundation and the framing structure. You're not really worried about, you know, the where's all the electrical switches going to go. Not yet. That comes at its time, you know.
Yeah, that's a good comparison, building a house versus writing a story, because everybody knows generally what a house looks like. And in different cultures, houses look different. So
Yeah.
a story in another culture could be told differently than a story in another. But that maybe that's the difficult part, is you don't really visualize the structure of a story so you know when it's finished. Like I know when a book's finished because I've gotten sick of reading it, and I just go, okay, this is 20 times through and it's never going to be done because I'll just change it. And
Yeah.
eventually it's not making it better. It's just different. It's just
Yeah.
changing a word here, changing a word there. And you
Yeah.
probably change it back and forth if you did it enough. So I think you're just done with it. Maybe, yeah, the story's not done. You're just done with it.
Yeah. I think there is a point of sort of completion, you know. And you know, going back to one thing I said earlier was, you know, having your ending in mind before you start. That doesn't mean that that's the ending you're going to end up with. It just means that's your roadmap, that's your direction. Because more than once I've gotten to the end and I realize from something I've written, like, oh my God, now that's the ending, you know. So don't feel like, hey, this is the ending and I got to figure out a way to get there. Just go that direction, and if it's right, it'll be there. If it's not, the right thing will be there.
Yeah, it's nice when it clicks in and you finish or close to finish the first draft, and then you start to see connections and things that maybe it was a subconscious thing, or maybe
Mhm.
it's just where the story's coming from. It's that muse of it. It's like,
Yeah,
okay, you've got it kind of right. And since you've listened along the way, you get the things that you didn't see. And then when you back up from the picture enough, you go, oh, okay, I can see the larger picture here. But
yeah, yeah.
hmm,
Now, I wrote when I was work. I mean, this has happened a couple of times where I'd be writing, and I'll add, like in the book, I added this one thing that happens that actually happened to me. And it's no spoiler. I was it was during COVID, and I was stopped at a stoplight, and a woman in a van was coming from, you know, this opposite direction this way, and she went to turn, and she was looking at her phone, and a guy just smashed right into the side of her van. The van rolls over, and now it's on its side right in front of my vehicle, like 20 feet in front of my vehicle. And I jumped out and I ran over to see if she was okay, and she was screaming hysterically. And so there happened to be like a gardener, I think, because now the van is up on its side. And so the gardener came over and with a ladder, and I climbed up the ladder, and I had to puncture the airbags because they were still inflated. And I could see her in hysterics. And so anyway, long story short, I helped her get out of the van, and then I left. So I took that story and I used it in my book. And at the time I used it, I wasn't really sure why I was putting it in there. But then later in the book, it like hit me like a lightning bolt. Like that's why I put that in there, because that equals this equals that equals that, And it's just, so don't throw away stuff, as you're writing, because you think like, well, that has nothing to do with the story. That's, because I think stories, scripts, and especially scripts, because you have a more compact amount of time to tell that story. Every scene in a screenplay has to move the story forward, has to have something to do. Like if you've ever watched a movie and you find yourself getting bored about a scene, it's because probably the scene has nothing to do with the story. It's just something they put in there to fill time or whatever. Books, you can let the air out a little more, have a little more time, and in a book, a story that maybe has nothing to do with the overall story, but it has to do with building the characters' personality, like who they are, why they think the way they think, or what they do. So it's a yeah, it's an interesting thing when you find yourself writing something that you don't think has anything to do with anything, and then later you realize, oh no, that has everything to do with everything.
Mm. Yeah, I got into writing screenplay from regular books because I was trying to find a better way to do dialogue tags, because I
Mm,
got tired of the he said, she said. And
yeah,
then I also was like, well, I want to have the character have a distinct enough voice to where the reader can tell who it is just by seeing the line, not by seeing the dialogue tag. And
yeah,
maybe every now and then, like every once or twice in a page, you can, if there's a lot of dialogue, you can
right,
get the dialogue tag in just so people can pick it back up. They don't have to flip back and go, who's saying this now? And then I started thinking about like literature books growing up in high school or earlier, reading plays and going, well, can I just put the person's name here and a colon and then what they're supposed to say? And I was like, well, that's not going to do very good. And then I started looking at scripts and I was like, oh, just center of the page. That's
mm,
interesting. And
yeah,
then I always thought if you had a book of something, you could do a movie for it easy because it's already there.
yeah,
And then I realized trying to write a script, how different it was than writing a novel and going, oh, this is way stripped down. It's
hmm
way more collaborative. You want to make it exciting, not only for the final product, like the story and all that, but you want to make it exciting, I think, for the director, for the actors, for all those people that are involved in it, and give
right,
them enough space to be able to say, I think the person says it this way, and not
right,
explain how everybody says everything all the
yes.
time.
No,
And
I've seen that a lot. That's a very common mistake with young screenwriters, is they feel like they have to put in all this information, and they got to remember that it's a visual medium. We're going to see what's happening. You don't have to over explain. I mean, there are things that you have to say, interior dirty hotel room. It looks like it hasn't been cleaned in months. That's all you need to say. You'll get it, because everybody that works on a film or a television show, they're all artists too. They're different, you know. The writer's an artist, the actors are artists, but the set deck guy is an artist. The location manager is an artist, and you got to let them put their art in, also contribute to the overall thing. That's why whenever you see people win an award, they're always thanking their crew and the people that work behind the scenes, because it's nothing without those people. You can't take a perfectly clean, perfect hotel room and turn it into some sleazy, you know, prostitute infested drug den by yourself. Somebody's got to do that, and that's your art department and your set deck and the props people and all that kind of stuff has to be part of it. So when writing a screenplay, you have to minimize how much information you put in there, especially in terms of stage direction. I always cringe when I read a script and they say, and then Bob walked in the room and raised an eyebrow at Jimmy. And, like, how do you know that's what the actor is going to do, And,
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say,
Raising
one of the things that I did when I was sort of starting out was I had a friend who had an acting class. And I said to him one day, I write scenes and I write stuff. Do you think your acting class would ever want to do a scene? He says, are you kidding me? We're always looking for material to practice with, to do scenes with, to interpret, to da da da. I said, great. So I sent him this scene, and he said we were going to rehearse it, and I think it was a scene between two people. He goes, I have two different sets of people that are going to do the scene, and I'd love for you to come see it. Great. So I went and I watched them do it. Both sets did it completely different than the other, and both did it completely different than I had imagined it.
Wow.
So you can't predetermine with what an actor is going to do, how they're going to interpret the material, what they're going to imagine is the backstory of this character. So, screenwriters out there, just take a step back. You don't have to get too involved in all that stuff.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Get some student actors to go through your stuff. I imagine that helps with the writer too, to be able to see if it's bad or not. And
immensely, because you see the holes and the gaps, and you think, oh wait, if he said that instead, it's one thing in your head, but it's one thing to see it performed. It's really helpful.
What is that element that's missing? Is it in the writing, the directing, or the acting? Or is it all of it when you look at a movie and you go, oh, this is bad versus this is great? Like, what is that certain something?
I don't know if it's one certain thing. I think that it can be any number of things. It can be just a bad story. I mean, unfortunately, we live in a time where the emphasis is put on the actors they're hired for the particular job rather than the script itself. If you go back and study film and the history of movie making, there was a time in like 40s and 50s, especially, when a studio hired an actor under contract. And so they would give this actor a certain amount of, like, a salary every week, whatever it was back then, $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 a week. And they just would work whenever they were told to work. And because they were on salary, they worked them all the time. So they were cranking out movies like crazy. That's why if you look at that period of time, more movies were made then than in any other time in history, because studios had 50 guys and women under contract, and they don't want them sitting around. They want them working. They want that machine making money. And so you had all this content being made, and the emphasis wasn't so much on who's in it as it was like a story, and like, now, okay, who's available for that? Oh, let's just use him. But now it's so much about box office, and we say, like, well, if you can get Tom Hanks or Brad Pitt, then we can make this movie. Like, why? It's a good movie. It would be a good movie if the person starring in it nobody had ever heard of. And if you go back a little bit and look at films that were made, in recent memory, every once in a while some movie will come along. I think one just won an Oscar recently, where you're like, I don't know anybody in this movie, but it's like everybody loves it, and it's making $1 billion or whatever. And it's because it's a great story, and it's executed well, and it's with good acting, not necessarily famous people, just good acting.
Yeah, I have seen movies where I think they had too many famous people, and it ruins it, because you're like, I'm not believing that this is the person. So maybe it's not that certain something, that it's the way all the pieces fit together. Like, if you're looking at a B movie and you go, well, this is obviously a B movie. Look, this is This is terrible. Like, look over here, not over here. Say it like, don't say it like you're reading it. You know, that
Yeah, exactly.
it's pieces of everything: the writing, the acting, the directing, the film, like the cinematography, all of that mixed together just
Mhm.
gets you the feel that that's not right.
Yeah, it can be distracting, I think, when there's so it was a movie or mini series about Benjamin Franklin not that long ago, and it was on a streamer, and they had Michael Douglas playing Benjamin Franklin, and I think Michael Douglas is a wonderful actor, but it was so distracting. I never once believed that he was Benjamin Franklin. I kept thinking like it's
Mm,
Michael Douglas pretending to be, if they'd have just got somebody that nobody recognized, you'd believe it was, you could buy into it. But because you keep seeing him, it was hard. So yeah, it
yeah.
can be very distracting.
It just makes you want to watch Romancing the Stone. Really.
Or a Kurt Douglas film, because now they almost look like they were twins the way he's
Yeah.
aged.
Jeez. Yeah. It is strange how you see a lot of actors and you go, this looks like a mixture of this person, this person, and this person. And you go, I wonder if they got the job
Yeah,
because they look like Tom Cruise from this direction.
yeah, that happens too. They want a certain type. They want the Tom Cruise type. And then sometimes you get a movie where that's the gimmick. We're gonna fill it with a whole bunch of stars like Reds, and it's like everybody is like a funny, interesting actor, and so it kind of works. There was a movie back in the '60s called "It's a Mad, 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 Mad World," and same thing. They would do that. Like everybody was a star. Towering Inferno, everybody was a star. Sometimes it works, right? But then it just has to be the right material, I suppose, because sometimes it really does not work.
When you're writing, have you written anything that you've done writing with another person, whether it's a book or a screenplay where you're splitting it up equally, or is there always someone that's taking the lead on that?
um, only one time did I sort of pair up with a man who was a friend of mine, and I thought he was a really wonderful writer. And so we used to get together and BS about what we were writing and working on, da da da. And he had this story, and I said, "Well, that's a good story." And then I started chiming in with ideas. He goes, "Oh, that's a good idea." So we kind of, like he would do a draft, send it to me, and then I would make changes and send it back to him, and he would. And this kind of went back and forth for a while. And then unfortunately, he passed away, which was very sad because I thought he was super talented and a nice man. But and so nothing ever really happened with the script, but that was kind of the only time I ever did that. And I probably, I like to make the decisions about what happens next, at least for my part of it, because when you work with networks and stuff, they always have their input, they always want to make changes, but I like to be able to go, okay, here, this is how I see it, and not have to argue with anybody until then.
Yeah, I think what got me into the script writing, also not just the dialogue stuff, was doing some collaborative writing on some novella length science fiction. And it was basically off of another guy's idea, the
uh,
other guy that's writing it. So I was like, well, I just have to defer to him on all the big decisions because that's his idea. So I'm
yeah,
just going to, in a way, I'm trying to sell my idea and say, what about this? And the way we did it was he do a chapter, I do a chapter, he do a chapter, I do a chapter. And
yeah,
before we talked roughly about the characters, but not really so much that we knew the characters yet. And then
yeah,
you see how they develop going through. And that was really good. I did 2 books with him and then writing a screenplay now with another person, and it's different. I think you do have to give up a lot of control, but in the screenplay one, I feel like since it's more the premise that I came up with, that I get the final decision on what things happen. So if it's a good idea, I'll change it. But
yeah.
I think I'm the one that's doing is it a good idea? I'm the decider, as they say.
Yeah,
But
it's a
it's
relationship, right? Like any other relationship, there's give and takes, compromises. Um, it's funny, but when I wrote the book, I actually, it was an idea for a TV show because I'd been hired by a channel that I'd done a bunch of work for in the past. They wanted to get into scripted dramas, and so this was at the sort of like early 2020, so COVID was raging, right? And everybody was at home, and they said, you know, we really want to try to get into scripted dramas. You know, pitch us some ideas. So I gave them 3 ideas that I'd worked on, and they picked one, and not this one, but a different one, which I thought, wow, I thought this was the best one, but okay. So they picked this other one. We developed a little bit, and then, as so often happens, nothing happened. So I kept thinking about Long Branch. I kept thinking, like, no, this is a good idea. What should I should do something with this, you know? So I had all this time on my hands, and then because after COVID, there was a writer strike, so I had more time on my hands. So I decided I'm going to write a book. I'm going to see if I can do it, you know? And that's how the book was written. Well, funny enough, now I released it a year ago this month. Now I'm in talks with a prominent showrunner about turning it into a TV show. And to your point, I had a meeting with her not that long ago, and she had some very good ideas that had nothing to do with my book, but would help tell the story in a visual way. And she's a very, very experienced showrunner with a lot of wonderful credits, somebody that I really respect. And I just said, look, and it was nice because she was sort of checking in with me, like, I'm thinking about this, and is that okay with you? And I was like, I'm on board. Whatever you want to do, I'm on board because you know what you're doing, you know. I have some credits, but her credits are longer than my arm, you know. So I was like, whatever you think, you know. Um, as long as it didn't compromise the characters of the main story, which it didn't, it added to. So, you know, I mean, in that case, that will be the first time I've collaborated with anybody since that friend of mine who passed away, and I'm looking forward to it. I think she's a really wonderful writer. She's always been encouraging to me, hired me once or twice to do some stuff for her. So I think it'll be a good fit.
Nice. That's a good consideration between experience and success. Like you can listen to a person with a lot of experience, but that you know, you take that for what it is. But if somebody is successful in the way that you want to be successful,
Right.
I think the deferring to them is probably pretty good. I mean, fight for your ideas still to a certain point, but then it's, I mean, if it's good for the story, it's going to make sense. It
Yeah,
might change the story a lot, but
yeah, but I mean, also, you know, it's not brain surgery. We're not curing cancer here. We're making a story. Whatever we can add to the story to make it better, to make it more interesting. Look, if she said something to me that was really like, I would say, like, I don't understand why we're going down that road, you know, and she'd have to explain it to me. But I don't think that's going to happen in this case.
nice. How far along are you on that project then?
Just in the very early stages of sort of outlines and things like that, of just like, how do you, you know, because the important thing is the pilot, you know. I have people, because I work with Joe, people pitch him things often. I got this great idea, and they tell you this idea, and it typically is a pretty good idea, but it's all in the execution. So we always say, sounds like a great idea. When you have a script, bring it in and we'll read it, you know. Well, most people don't end up bringing us a script, and so that's where it sort of dies, because I think people think like, man, I have a great idea for a movie, here it is, and they tell you, and I think they expect you to go, that is a great idea, I'm going to go make it, you know. Well, it's all in the execution. Like, how do the people talk to each other, what's the set, you know. There's a zillion things that go into a script. So what I'm saying, reason I'm saying all that is because the first step in taking a book and turning it into a series is making that first episode so interesting or in exciting that it will draw the reader in, and hopefully an audience. So you got to really get that first script right, and then you lay out the next 8 or 10 episodes, whatever you're sort of pitching for, what you think each one of those episodes will sort of cover, and how the series ends, and how you see it moving into hopefully a second season.
What format do you use for script writing?
I use Final Draft. I started out on software called Screenwriter,
Mhm.
but then when I got a job working on a TV show, I wrote a couple episodes for this TV show. Everybody used Final Draft, so they said you got to use Final Draft because then we'd have to convert it and da da da. So I had to learn Final Draft, which now I love. I love Final Draft.
Oh, so they can take the final draft and then do a shooting script off of a
They can
regular
break
script.
it down and do a budget, and it's all kind of interlaced with other software.
So it's not necessarily the format; it's the software that it's written in is what they're looking for.
Yeah, because and there's templates in that software,
Mhm.
and that particular show, they sent me their template, right? So that sort of gave me a guide, like, oh, that's how they want it formatted in terms of that particular show. But I mean, if you go into Final Draft and you just look at the templates, there is a template for 60-minute, TV drama or whatever it's written, and that's pretty good for most everything.
Yeah, I looked at a few of those when I started the script writing, and then I realized that I didn't know the language of script writing enough to be able to have a format that's going to help me because I didn't know what those things were. Like,
Yeah,
I didn't understand, well, why do I want to have a transition here? And what type of cut is this? And how am I going
yeah,
to start the scene? And where's the summary? And all of these, just those little visual formatting things. And
yeah,
as I formatted it myself, just off of looking at other scripts, going, okay, well, this seems like this is how they're doing it. And then
hmm,
just doing it in Word and going, okay, now I think I could probably use a template to
yeah,
do all those other things where it could take out, help do the shooting script or whatever. Or
yeah. I mean, something like Final Draft helps you a great deal with formatting because everything is sort of preset within the program. So when you hit, and you write out the scene heading, and then you hit enter, and then it gives you a choice. Is the next thing going to be dialogue? Is it going to be a shot, angle, whatever it is, right? So if you hit dialogue, then bang, it already centers it in the middle of the page. Now you type in your character name and then you go, right? Once you type in your character name, then it remembers that character name for the whole process. So every time you start to type out, if his name is William, every time you start to type out WI, it autofills William unless you keep, typing to change it to something else. So it speeds up the process a great deal.
okay, that's what I figured. It's like a language I need to learn. I just don't know it yet.
But
But after,
what you could do, which is what I did, is you can buy scripts online and read them. Like
yeah,
read. I read so many scripts before I really started trying, and I think that's a good education because you read things and you notice things and you start to see patterns and all that kind of stuff. So it's very helpful.
yeah, that, and then reading, I think it's Sid Fields,
Yeah, that was the book I
whatever
read.
his book.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was a good one. I was like,
that's the,
okay,
that's the
I'm just
Bible
gonna
screenwriting.
I'm just going to write it because there was a part in there where it said the format doesn't matter as long as it makes sense and you can follow it. Then I
Yeah,
go, okay,
yeah,
okay, that's permission for me to do it myself on Word and then see
yeah.
what it looks like.
Yeah, I mean, people get caught up, I think, a little too much in the technical aspect of it. Just write a good script. If it's a good script, we'll figure it out. Don't worry about it.
Nice. What is your writing area like? Do you have a specific place where you write, or are you a write anywhere person?
No, I have written other places. I've written on airplanes in sort of an emergency. I was flying to the East Coast, and I was working on two different shows at once, and I had to finish this one short. It was a short. They're like 20, 30 minute episodes, and I had to finish it before I landed. So I had to finish with a laptop. But typically, I write where you see me now in my office in Burbank, and I try to write every day. I try to write at least 2, 3 hours every day. Um, And one thing, it's like a technique I kind of developed for myself. I don't stop writing until I know what I'm going to write next, because I have found for me, I've found that if I get to a point when I'm as in a story and I'm like, gee, I don't know what I should do next or what happens next, I'll think about it overnight. It takes me longer to get back to the keyboard than if I say, okay, I'm at this point and now I know the next thing I'm going to write about is how he stopped at this truck stop and met this guy and da da da. I'll come back to the keyboard the next day, no problem, because I know what I want to do. So I think that's maybe been a big help to me to keep me going and not get me stuck. Because if you don't know what you're going to write next and you say, oh, I'm going to think about it, days turn into weeks.
Yeah, I think Hemingway talked about that's what he did. If he didn't know he stopped when he knew what was happening next.
Yeah. Oh, really? Oh, good. So I picked up a
I mean,
Hemingway technique. I didn't know that.
Hemingway's good, and I imagine back in the day when you didn't have TV or the internet, so you could see everything, that having a person explain Paris to you in a movable feast in
Yeah.
a normal way would
Yeah.
help you visualize it. But when it comes down to it, all that is just a guy in Paris writing about writing and talking to other writers.
Yeah.
So you go, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then
But
you expect books to like change your life, and then you read Hemingway and go, okay, he likes bullfighting.
yeah,
Okay, it's good.
it's all in context, right? I mean, like you
But
said,
he
it was
wrote it, so
that time
it's the
period.
difference. Yeah.
Yeah. That time period, everybody was like, wow, this is great, man. Have you read about Paris? Yeah. Because
Yeah.
you're
How
right.
many people thought about swimming in Spain and then climbing up onto a swimming platform and having a Spanish beer? Like
Yeah.
that had to be like some escapism for people back then. And
Well,
now you're
it's
bombarded
like
with so much information.
The Old Man in the Sea, right? I mean, it's about a guy trying to catch a fish, and you're just like, oh my God, please catch it already. Like,
Yeah.
who cares at this point, But it was that day's action adventure thing. So I guess it's all about context.
Yeah. I like how the different types of writing affect all the other types. And it makes me look at creativity in general and think what a great thing to have in school, primary school, especially different art classes, music,
Yeah.
painting, writing, all those things that they seem like we don't need that anymore. But
Yeah.
that's the stuff that helps you figure out what it is you like and mix all those things together. Like it's writing poetry makes my prose more lyrical, which I think they should be. It shouldn't just be regular stuff. And then, but not too much. And then it also helps dialogue and doing screenwriting. Even if nothing ever comes of it, it helps you write dialogue better in a
Yeah.
book. So,
Yeah. It's funny you say that, because I do recall in grade school, especially, we had writing class, and they would challenge us like, okay, we're going to all write a poem about your
mhm.
favorite, whatever. And it was that first sort of experience that I had with, like, oh, make up a story about something and write it out, like, okay. And I remember I was probably, I don't know, like fourth grade maybe, and I wrote this because I grew up in the 70s, and so Jaws was a big deal.
Mhm.
And so I wrote this short story called Claws, with a C, about an eagle
Nice.
that attacked people and took them away.
I like it.
And it was so fun. I really enjoyed that process, and so I always kind of liked writing stories and telling stories, and growing up. But I never thought about pursuing it as a career. It never entered my mind.
Do you visualize that creative muse, like in the Roman sense of the muse, like something outside of you that it's what it's doing when you're not listening to it? Like if there's a muse for writing a book, is that separate than the muse for writing poetry, for writing music, for painting, for doing all those things? And what is that muse doing when you're not engaged with it? ever think about
Boy,
that?
wow, that's an amazing question. I don't know. I mean, I never envisioned multiple muse. I always figured, to me, I always thought there was just one voice.
Hmm.
Because I mean, I have written a little poetry, but most of my stuff has been in this world. Um, and what, I don't know what he or she does when I'm not siphoning off information. My hope is that they're collecting information for me for when the moment comes that I need it. They're like, oh yes, here you go. This is what I have for you today. Um, and I think it also works in a mysterious way. Like I tell sometimes other friends of mine who are writers who do sort of get blocked on, like, I just don't know what to do next. I don't know, this couple, I'm writing about this couple and they're having a fight and I just don't know. I'm not in a relationship, so I don't really know. Like, and I always tell people, just go out into the world, go to the mall and sit and watch people and listen to people. Next time you're on an airplane, listen to what's happening in the terminal before you get on the plane. People are talking and things are happening all around you all the time. And I think that you can take from that. And maybe what you end up with is completely different, but it might inspire you in some way.
Yeah, I think writer's block is just being bored, not bored, not wanting to write at that moment for some reason. Like all the resistance you face, like if you don't know what you're going to write about, less likely to go sit down and write. That if you just sit down and start doing it, something's going to happen. And
Yeah,
that's why I think you get a lot of ideas when you're in the shower or when you're doing some monotonous task, cutting the grass, working out, whatever,
yeah,
and then you throw some music in there with it.
yeah,
And my goodness, I think we're much more creatively linked into music and sound than we
absolutely,
realize.
absolutely.
And then when you think about the different muses, I think that's what the gods, the Greek gods, the Roman gods was all about, was this is just that entity. It might all be one, but this is that little slice that deals with this. That's why there's so many gods of war, because
Right.
humans really like war. So it's interesting to think about. Like I visualize my book writing muse as some guy in an apartment with the blinds closed. He's watching TV. He's wearing a robe. He's drinking out of a milk carton, like a classic milk carton, not a gallon jug, but the paper one. And
Yeah.
he's just waiting. And then I'm like, I feel guilty because I haven't visited or listened with
Right.
what's going on there today. So let me do that. And
Yeah.
then the poetry one is just a different feeling, like you're in the woods somewhere. It's twilight. You can't really see where you're going, but the branches aren't hitting you in the face. So you're in this dark forest. And then the script writing muse is more of, I mean, is Gene Hackman from Get Shorty, really, is
Yeah.
what that muse looks like. And he's just Harry Zim trying to tell me, that's not right. Do this way, not that way.
Right.
So
That's funny.
I think that helps to also work your visualization muscles too, to where if you weren't going to write, you're not sitting there alone. That muse is either staring at you, judging, or
Yeah.
telling you something that you're not paying attention to.
Well, you kind of alluded to it earlier. I think writer's block, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, writing is a discipline, right? Just like working out. Like I get up every morning and I ride my stationary bike for half an hour. And every morning when I get up, I don't want to do it every single day. Like, oh my God, I'll skip today. I'll skip. No, I have to do it. And then I trick myself. Like, I'll just do 15 minutes today. Then once I'm on it and I'm going and I see the 15-minute marker coming up, I think, no, I can do 30. I can do this. And I think that that's the same in writing. You got to force yourself to sit down and start writing, even if it's gobbledygook. Doesn't matter. Once you start going, it'll loosen up. It'll start working. But I think it
Yeah,
is a difference.
with working out, I've never had a time where when I thought about it and I was like, oh, I don't really feel like doing it, and then I do it. I've never had a time where I regretted it.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
writing is very similar. Like working out, you could get injured and then you're like, why did I try to do that thing
Yeah.
that mess my shoulder up or whatever. And then in writing, sometimes I equate that with if you find something that's an emotional thing and you write about it and you're like, oh man, that's in my head now. And then I think of that as like some sort of a, maybe not a psychological scar, but certainly a marker. Like the one I think about the most is writing a poem from the perspective of our dog growing up that lived in a pen behind the house. And now I think, why would we get a dog and put him in a pen behind the house and we only let him out twice a day? And some dogs don't get let out. And then you're like, oh, I'm a terrible person. And now I got to think about that. And you go, oh, I don't want to. So now then you have a dog, sleeping beside you on their own special sofa. So it's, man, yeah.
No, I know what you mean. I mean, there's some subject matters so I've co-written a couple of Criminal Minds episodes, and it's a very dark show. And what's funny is on both episodes, the writer I worked with, he kind of wrote the murder and mayhem part of it, and I sort of wrote the story, the character stuff, the interesting sort of B story stuff that was going on. Because I don't know. I think the world is maybe dark enough. I don't know.
Yeah, you do write things and you go, wow, that's when you get into the evil side of things and you go, this can definitely take you over.
Yeah.
If you start writing too much about this, and then you start to wonder, as you said before, how is this advancing the plot? What's this doing for the story? Is this just evil for evil's sake? Is it whatever that guy was in Hamlet that just did? Was it Iago? Is that Hamlet that just did evil for evil's sake? Or Jafar in Aladdin that was just, there's no explanation of why this person is motivated for that. No. Maybe there doesn't always have to be, but it's a world.
It is a world.
So when you have your stuff writing, do you have ideal readers or people that you send the draft to when you get to the point where you're willing to have somebody else look at it and see if it's tracking or if it's making sense or
well, and yes. The short answer is yes. So I wrote a show for a long time called Hollywood Weapons, Fact or Fiction, and the premise behind the show was a bit like Mythbusters in that you would take a scene from a TV show or a movie where a weapon was used in some way, and then we would test it in the real world with a real weapon under the same conditions to see, does it really work that way? And like examples, we did an episode about Jaws. So when Roy Scheider shoots the scuba tank with his M1 Garand and the scuba tank explodes and killing the shark, would that really happen? If you had a scuba tank full of compressed air and shot it with a rifle, would it explode? The short answer is no, it doesn't explode. The gas just spews out like a rocket ship. But we tested it, and we did 6 seasons of that show where we just tested everything you can think of, from Die Hard and Born Identity, and it was so fun to do. So when I would write my first draft of an episode, well, I won't say first draft because I always rewrote it 5 times before anybody could see it. I would always send it to the host. His name is Terry Shepard. He's a retired Green Beret, 22, 23 years in the Army. I would always send it to him. He was our host, and he and I had a very similar sense of humor because I always added funny, almost like an homage to the film or TV show. So, for example, in the Jaws episode, it starts out with Terry dressed like Roy Scheider sitting on the beach, looking out on the water, just like Roy did in the movie. And then we get to this comical part where he then says, on this episode, we're testing Jaws, and I would always send it to him first because he would always give me the best feedback. He would read it and call me right away, like, oh my God, this is great. And what if I said this instead of that? Or what if we did that? Yes. And that would be the first layer of input. And then when we would and then I would send it to my director, John Carter, who would have input. And most of the time it was very minor. Like it wasn't a lot. Like most of it was technical. Like John would say, well, because John knew a lot about weaponry and firearms. He had an explosives license, and he would say, "Well, this is how we would have." Because I would say, "This is how we'll test it," and he would say, "That isn't safe. Let's do it like this." Like, okay, whatever's safe, you know. And I'm proud to say that in 6 seasons, we never had one accident on that show. It was really amazing. Our co-host Larry Zanoff works for a company called ISS, Independent Studio Services, which is one of the huge prop houses here in LA, and they have a massive firearms collection that they rent for film and TV. And Larry was our co-host. So Larry was always our range officer and always in charge of safety, and he's an amazing person. So, but once we got on set and we would, you know, you start, like I was saying before, when actors read stuff, you're like, oh wait, like don't say this word, say that word instead. So there was always that sort of fluidness to it on set. Um, and then that was like the next level of it. In terms of my book, I mean, I've written the first novel. I'm working on the follow up to that one. And when I finished, so the first thing I did is I never told anybody that I was writing a book, except my wife. That's the only person I told. And the reason I didn't tell anybody is because I'm sure you know this in life too. Not everybody's your friend. Even if they say they're your friend, they aren't necessarily your friend. And I've seen it with myself and with other people. And the minute you step out of what everybody expects of you, some people have this knee jerk reaction or feel the need to criticize you about it. Why are you doing that? Well, have you ever done that before? Well, what makes you think you can do that? You know, that kind of negativity. I didn't need it. And I didn't know if I could write a book. I knew I could write a screenplay in my sleep, but could I write a book? I don't know. So why should I tell everybody I'm doing this if I end up failing? Then the only person that knows is me and my wife, and that's okay. So when I got my first readable draft complete, she was the first person that I had read it. I said, I want you to read this before I let anybody else look at it. So she did, and she was very supportive, like, oh my God, this is great. This is great. No, I wouldn't change anything. I'm like, okay, well, I know something's going to change, but thank you. The next person I took it to was Joe Montaigne, because he had been such a long time advocate and supporter of my writing. I took him the manuscript. Funny side note is when I had it printed, I forgot to have it printed on both sides of the paper. So it was only printed on one side. So it was like super thick, like way thicker than it really should have been, you know,
Right.
like 600 pages. And I handed it to him and he was like, oh my God, what did you do? You know? So then he read it. And after he read it, that's when I started feeling confident about it, because he said, no, this is really good. You gotta get this published. You got to do something with this. So the next step for me was, I had a friend who had published some books, and I said, I need an editor because I know I'm sure I've made punctuation errors, and I'm sure that my formatting, which is very different than a screenplay, novel formatting is off. I need somebody that knows what they're doing. So he recommended this woman I mentioned before, Kara Highsmith, and I sent it to her, and she read it. I think she told me she read it twice, and then called me and said, I really think you could get this published, and I have an agent I want to introduce you to. And I said, wonderful. So after she finished her job, I sent it to this publishing agent who also loved it. And he said, I really think I could get this published. That's the good news. The bad news is it'll probably take 2 years before it actually comes out. That's the first thing. Second thing is you're going to give up about 90% of your royalties on this book if you go through traditional publishing. And he goes, you obviously make a living doing, you know, working in television, et cetera, and you have a lot of people, you know, a lot of people. If I were you, I would self-publish the first one. Build an audience, build fans. Then if you write another one, you can go to a publisher and say, look, I published one already myself, have a good track record, I have a built-in fan base. Let's talk about this next book. So that's what I did. I decided that I wanted it to get out right away. I wanted people to read it, and I was okay if it didn't sell. I thought at least my friends and family will buy it, and then I can check that off my bucket list and say I wrote a novel, you know. But it has just turned into something I couldn't imagine. I just got in. There's a magazine called The Best Holistic Life magazine, which is this magazine here, and they just released this last month that it's book of the year. Right there, that's me.
Ah, very
So
nice.
that, and combined with a bunch of other kind of awards and contests that I submitted it for, it's just been it's you know, it's one of those things that, like, I never knew this world really existed, and now I'm knee deep in it, and I wish I would have known about this 20 years ago, because it's pretty fantastic. So it's very exciting for me, and I'm certainly well ahead on the next one.
How many contests do you enter it in?
Man, that's a good question. Probably, I'm going to just say 20 off the top of my head. And most of them, I was a finalist at least. 5 or 6 of them I won. And then this was not even a contest. I'd done a podcast for the woman Jana Short, who runs the magazine, and the magazine is about people, you know, as you can imagine, with a name called Holistic Life. It's about healing, self-healing, physical healing. You know, I think you can buy the magazine in like Whole Foods and Sprouts, those kind of stores. And her whole take on the book, which I thought was interesting, she says, you know, I read your book twice. I liked it so much. And she said, your main character goes through this big sort of transformation from the beginning to the end about who he is as a person. And I was like, he does? Well, if you say so. And then I started thinking about it, and I thought, yeah, actually he does. That wasn't my intention, but that's how it kind of came out. So that was last year. And then I got an email around the middle of June saying, just want you to know our magazine's coming out, and your book is book of the year for our magazine. I was like very flattered. So
Nice.
yeah.
Very nice. That script we were working on, me and this other guy, we entered the pilot in maybe 6 contests, and the decision date hasn't come back on any, but I think it came back on one a few days ago. It's not included in the contest, which is a weird way of saying, you know, it was 500 and some in the 30-minute pilot episode or 30-minute pilot category, and they went forward with like 51 or 57. I was like, man, okay, it's tough.
You know, it's a cruel business, and you got to have thick skin, and you got to almost like rejection, because it's just part of the thing. And what I tell people is, don't take it personal, because like I was saying before, you know, like networks especially, they're trying to solve a problem, and they're trying to solve a problem in a specific way, and you don't know what that specific way is. If you get lucky enough to have written something that fills that need in that specific way, they will choose you. They will choose you. You just don't know. It's the luck of the draw. And I've seen it with like on the episodes of Criminal Minds that I've worked on. You know, the writers on that show are involved in the whole process, from casting all the way through. They're on set every day when their episode's being filmed, in case an actor wants to change a line or has a question or whatever. It's a really kind of inclusive environment they have over there. And so Joe was actually directing one of the ones that I worked on, and I'll never forget this woman. When they would do live casting, which they kind of don't so much anymore since COVID, but when they would do live casting, for every character that they were casting, they would have 3 people come in and read. The casting department would sort of narrow it down to, like, we think one of these 3 people is right. Most of the time they were. Sometimes they weren't. They'd have to call in more people, but most of the time they were. And I remember these 3 women came in, and they all read for the same part. And when the last woman came in, I didn't say a word. Joe didn't say. Nobody says a word during casting in terms of, oh, she's great. You know, not until after their audition. She walked in the room, and I thought to myself, oh man, she looks like she could be that person. That was my thought. She read the dialogue, when she read the dialogue, I thought, well, I would choose her, you know. So she left. Joe and I were there with the casting director, and Joe said, she's the girl. She's the girl. And the casting director said, well, she's not in the Screen Actors Guild. And Joe goes, well, she is now because that's the girl. And so I think it was a good lesson to learn that if you, in actors especially, you can't take it personal. When you walk in the room and that you don't click, it's not you. It's that you didn't fill what they had in their mind. And with contests and screenwriting and book writing and all that kind of stuff, it's all the same thing. You gotta hope that whoever's looking at your material is looking for something just like that.
Yeah. I mean, even if if nothing comes of it, it's still, as I said before, a great exercise in different types of writing. I mean, you're not going to be great at everything. So then you can say, well, I need to work on this better so I get better at it. Or you say, I got what I got from it and I'm moving on. But yeah, it's an interesting, it's more collaborative than I expected. And you're thinking about collaboration with people that you don't even know. Like you're thinking, if I were a director and I'm reading this, how am I taking it? If I'm the actor, how am I taking it? So that's interesting because you don't think about that with a book. Right? You just write something that you like, and then maybe somebody else will like it. It's just, are you going to find that other person that likes it?
Yeah, I mean, you got to write for yourself. That's 100% truth. Because if you're trying to write something you think will fill a need or you think audiences will like, then you're lost. Because if you wouldn't watch it, well, why would anybody else? Like you got to write something that you would really enjoy seeing on television. And these days, especially with the way technology has advanced so much, you can take a screenplay like that and you can find actors, throw a rock in the air and you can find a bunch of actors that are just dying to do something on camera, and you can film 5 minutes at a time or one scene at a time and put it up on YouTube. I mean, Cobra Kai is a great example of that. These guys were making a YouTube series, and somebody realized, like, wow, they have a lot of people watching this. Maybe we should make it a TV show and put it on Netflix. And it became this big phenomenon. So I mean, it happens, a lot by doing that, and it's fun, and it's fun to see your words be dramatized on television, even if it's just YouTube.
What's the best way for people to follow your work?
My website is danrambooks.com, and I'm on Instagram, Dan Ramm Author. And the book is available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and pretty much any place you buy a book. And there's also an Audible version read by Joe Mantegna, which is really cool. And he's got a lot of experience doing audiobooks. He's been doing them for maybe 35 years or so, and he's done everything from The Godfather to Boardwalk Empire to you name it. He's done all these books, audiobooks. And so he got excited about the idea of doing my book, which was a big thrill for me. And he doesn't just read the book. That's what was really cool about it. And I'm sitting in this booth watching him do it because he's done it. I mean, he's recorded, probably 25 books in the last 10 years. And I never go on those sessions. That's his thing, and he does it. He's in there all day, and I do other stuff for him or myself. But this one, obviously, I'm going to be there. It's my book, right? So to watch him read these lines, and what he does is, and I don't know how he does this, but he takes every character and he gives them a unique voice. The men, the women, everything. Everybody has a different voice. So when he's reading the story and he reads what somebody is saying, he puts that voice in play. So now it's like you're almost listening to radio theater in a way. It's not just reading it, it's actually acting it out. And it's I couldn't be happier with it. It's just so thrilling to hear him bring that whole world to life.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good options to have the audio in with the regular book too.
Yeah, it's a very popular medium these days. I know a lot of my friends, they say, look, I'll buy the book, but I really want the audio version because I travel a lot, and that's what I do when I travel, is I listen to audiobooks. So that's out now on, you can get it on Amazon through Audible.
Yeah, website looks good. I like it.
Oh,
And
thanks.
when you were doing the cover and all of that, did you do that or did you have somebody else do that through Amazon?
No, I did the cover myself because when I was talking to my editor, she said, um, "Do you have an idea for a cover?" And I said, "Yeah, I kind of do. I'll make like a mock-up of it and I'll send it to you." So that I made that and I sent it to her and I go, "Now we just need to find somebody that can really make this look great." And she goes, "No, this is perfect. Why would you change anything?" And I was like, "Oh, okay, great. Just save some money."
Yeah, I like Amazon's all their KDP stuff. I just started using it in like 2014 and it has changed. They've gotten some better features on there and it's it's a great way to be able to tap into all those other different creative parts of when you're doing a book too, like doing the cover and choosing the type of paper and the size of the book. And
Yeah. I like
yeah,
that
it's
a
just
lot. The paper choice of and color of paper I thought was really cool because I didn't use the white. I kind of went with the off white because it's not quite so
mhm.
stark on your eyes. And then also, one thing I've had a lot of people say to me is like, "Thank you for making the font a little bit bigger than normal because it makes it so much easier to read." And I didn't even realize that I think my editor did that. I didn't even realize we were doing that. Uh, but now that I'm reading another book by another author right now, and I'm like squinting at the font, like, oh, I get it. Like, yeah, it should be a little bit bigger.
Yeah, that the back when House of Cards was popular, first popular, and they referenced the King in Yellow. I got that from Amazon, and the font on that and the margins were ridiculous. It was so small, it went all the way to the edges, and you had to really
Yeah,
pry the book open to look at it. And then when you see other people that print things that are out of copyright, and they just different versions of whatever type of classic literature you want, and you got to find the one that does it with a little thought into how it's on the page. Like I've seen even modern books, I've seen like Kennedy's The Real Anthony Fauci has ridiculous margins and the print is too small to the
yeah,
point where it makes it uncomfortable to read.
yeah,
So yeah, I like a 12 at least, and then if you're
yeah.
going to go up from that, I mean you want to have more than 3 words on a page, but you
Sure.
know
That's
there's
one of the great things about e-readers like Kindle. You can adjust the font and with a touch of a finger, it just flips to the next page. I wasn't a big fan of Kindles to begin with because like there's something about holding a book and
mhm.
that I really like. Sort of like albums. Remember albums had liner notes and
Yep,
all that stuff, and
yep,
now it's
yep.
all digital. But I got to say, when I travel, Kindle is a save because it's so light and thin, and I can just throw it in my briefcase or my bag, and you know, the book is there. It keeps track of where I was, and if I don't know what this word means, I tap on it, and it shows me the definition, and it's great.
You can keep the notes in there. Yeah, those are
Yeah,
great features.
yeah,
I wish they had something that would put it on a scroll and it would just scroll the words across there and maybe you could turn it off and on or stop the scroll just by eye contact somehow because there's some times where you could just sit it there and look at it and it would make your reading faster just for
yeah.
fun, but it would also it's like turn the page, turn the
I
page,
wouldn't be
turn the page
surprised
gets a little
because that technology already exists in teleprompters. Like there's
hmm.
some teleprompter software that you can get now to where somehow it knows as you're reading to keep moving. So I don't that's probably not far away.
Hmm. The website will be in the show notes if anybody wants to check it out, but it's a good website and then available on Amazon also. That's nice.
Yeah.
Is there anything you wanted to talk about that we didn't, or any thoughts in closing?
I don't think so. I would just say, I encourage you if you're thinking that you want to try to write something, I encourage you to write it. Even if nobody ever reads it, you will find it a difficult and rewarding experience to do. Um, it's just a good creative way to express yourself. I'm not a musician. I can't write songs. I can't play a guitar, but I can write, and that's my way of expression. I'm not a painter either.
Mm. Yeah, you just got to exercise those things. Every now and then I've had times where I'm thinking about a story, especially in the story arcs. And if you start to think, well, this person's arc is here, this person's arc is here, and you start to draw out on a page, then I go, this must be what a painter or somebody thinks like, where
Yeah,
they can just have an idea and then come up with a picture or visual representation of it. I mean, not so much as painting still life, but just,
yeah.
I guess it's more abstract, but
No, I have a
I
couple of
don't know.
artist friends, and I see their work, and I'm like, how do you do that? It's so perfect. It looks like a photograph. Like, how do you do that? Oh, it's not a big deal. Well, for you,
Yeah,
well, how do you write a book? Well, I get it. Now, everybody's got their thing, but yeah, and just don't get discouraged. If it doesn't, you're not trying to win the Pulitzer Prize. You're just trying to tell a story. Start with short stories. I always think that's a great idea to start with. Don't try to write a book. Maybe just try to write a page and then 2 pages, and then you just keep writing that story, keep developing that story. Maybe it'll turn into something.
I agree. Well, thank you very much for your time. I'll talk to you on the other side of this musical exit here.
Okay, thank you.